Claude responded. I was eating dinner alone at the same hardware store counter. My late wife and I used to run together for 26 years. When I saw a face that stopped my heya, I was eating dinner alone at the same hardware store counter my late wife and I used to run together for 26 years when I saw a face that stopped my heart cold. The young woman ringing up paint cans 3 registers down, her uniform vest hanging loose over what was clearly a pregnant belly, was my son's wife. The daughter-in-law my son had told the entire family had run off with another man and wanted nothing to do with us anymore. The moment she looked up and saw me, she dropped the receipt roll and walked fast toward the back stockroom like she'd seen a ghost. I am grateful you're here with me tonight. Before we go further, tell me something, brother, sister, friend, wherever you're tuning in from. Where are you watching this from right now? Drop it below, because every one of you matters to me. And one honest note before this story begins. Some names and details ahead have been shaped for the sake of the lesson inside them. But what happened underneath is truer than I wish it were. My name is Walter Higgs. I'm 69 years old, and for 31 years I ran Higgs Building Supply out of a single lot on Route 9 outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, until it grew into 4 locations and a distribution warehouse that services half the contractors in 3 counties. My wife Ruth and I built that business together, counting nails into paper bags before we could afford a register. Ruth passed 4 years ago from a stroke that took her in 11 minutes flat, faster than I could get from the warehouse to the house. I still drive past the old lot every Sunday. I still order the same coffee, black, no sugar, at the diner 2 doors down from the register, where I saw Corinne standing that night. Corinne Whitfield had married my son Marcus 6 years ago in a backyard ceremony with paper lanterns Ruth strung up herself. She was quiet in the way that takes people a long time to understand isn't shyness, it's carefulness. She noticed things. She remembered which grandchild liked ketchup and which one didn't, remembered Ruth's birthday without being told twice. 8 months ago, Marcus called me from his apartment, the one he'd moved into after he said the marriage was over, and told me Corinne had left him for a man from her old job, packed a bag one afternoon and never came back. Wouldn't answer his calls. Wouldn't explain herself. He cried on the phone. I believed every word of it, because why would a father doubt his own son crying into a receiver at 11 at night? That evening at the hardware store, watching her disappear behind a plywood display and a hand-lettered sign that said, "Employees only," none of it sat right anymore. I followed her back there, past pallets of concrete mix, my knees complaining the way they always did lately, worse than they should for a man who used to load lumber onto his own truck bed until he was 65. I found her sitting on an overturned bucket, both hands pressed flat against her belly, crying without trying to hide it. "Please," she said before I'd even gotten a full sentence out. "Please don't tell him you saw me. Please, Mr. Higgs. If he finds out where I am, I don't know what happens next, and I can't not like this, not 7 months along." I asked her what in God's name she was talking about, and what she told me over the next 20 minutes, sitting on cracked concrete in a stockroom that smelled like sawdust and rubber gasket sealant, took the version of my son I'd built in my head and set a match to it. She hadn't left Marcus. Marcus had told her, 3 days after I gave him signing authority on the company's line of credit as an early inheritance gesture, that he needed her out of the apartment for a while, that things were getting complicated, and it would be easier if people believed she'd left him first. He'd promised her it was temporary. He'd promised her money he never sent. She'd been staying in a converted garage behind her cousin's place in Mechanicsburg for 5 months, working register shifts because the small savings she had wouldn't stretch through a pregnancy alone, and every time she tried calling Marcus to ask what temporary meant, the number rang through to nothing. I sat down on a stack of drywall boards across from her, and for the first time since Ruth died, I felt actual fear settle into my chest instead of just grief. Not fear for myself. Fear for what my son had turned into while I was too busy running 4 store locations to notice. I want to be straight with you about something before this story goes further, because I've learned the hard way that trust built on assumption is the most expensive kind there is. I had been feeling strange for about 4 months myself, dizzy in the mornings, a tremor in my right hand I'd blamed on age, a fog behind my eyes some days that made simple math on invoices take 3 times as long as it should. My doctor called it early onset blood pressure complications combined with stress. He adjusted my prescription twice. Neither adjustment helped even a little, and somewhere underneath the fog, a small, cold part of my mind had started keeping a private list of who benefited if Walter Higgs got confused enough to sign things he shouldn't. I drove Corinne to a Red Roof Inn off the interstate that night and paid for 2 weeks up front in cash. Told the desk clerk it was a family situation, and the clerk didn't ask questions because a man my age paying cash with red eyes rarely invites follow-up conversation. I waited in the parking lot until her window light came on before I left. The drive back to my house on Chestnut Ridge Road took 18 minutes, and I counted every stoplight because counting things was something Ruth used to tease me about. Said I turned everything into an inventory when I was scared. And she was right. She was always right. And I missed her so much in that truck it felt physical. I didn't sleep. I went into Marcus's old bedroom, the one I'd never repainted since he moved out at 22, and sat at his childhood desk and opened the bottom drawer that always sticks. Underneath old baseball cards and a broken calculator, I found a folder I didn't remember him owning. Bank statements. Not his personal account, the business line of credit account, the one I'd added him to 18 months earlier as a gesture of trust. One more thing I thought would finally make him feel like an equal partner instead of an employee's son. 14 transfers over the last year and a half, total just under $900,000. Every transfer routed to something called Redline Capital Solutions LLC, registered out of an address in Lancaster that, when I looked it up on my phone sitting right there at his old desk at 2 in the morning, turned out to be a UPS mailbox store. The next morning, I did not confront Marcus. I want you to understand why, because half of my family did not understand it, and maybe you won't either at first. I have been building things my whole life, and the one lesson 40 years in business teaches you is that when you find a hole in the foundation, you do not start shouting on the second floor. You go down and find out how deep the rot goes before you decide what to tear out and what to save. I drove instead to see a man named Otis Reardon, 66 years old, who had run the loading dock at my original Route 9 location for 19 years until 2016, when a shipment discrepancy pointed 3 fingers at 3 employees, and I'd let a young operations manager convince me the numbers pointed hardest at Otis. I fired him on a Thursday morning without asking him a single follow-up question, because the paperwork looked clean and I was in a hurry to get back to a board meeting about the 4th location. Otis had looked at me across my own desk and said, quiet as anything, I didn't touch that shipment, Mr. Higgs, and I had said I was sorry and let him walk out anyway. He was still in Harrisburg, running a small engine repair shop out of his garage. When I showed up on his porch 9 years later with an apology I should have given him a decade earlier, he didn't slam the door, which honestly I hadn't been sure he wouldn't. He listened. He accepted it the way a man accepts something he stopped needing a long time ago but appreciates being handed anyway. Then, he told me his nephew Deshaun did contract bookkeeping for small logistics outfits around the county, and if I wanted, Deshaun could take a look at what I'd found. Quietly, before I brought in anybody official, Deshaun Reardon turned out to be exactly the kind of methodical that makes an old man like me feel useless with a keyboard. Within 2 days, he had pulled every filing on Redline Capital Solutions LLC and 2 related shell entities he found hiding behind it. All 3 registered within a 6-week span the previous year, all 3 listing the same registered agent, a woman named Priscilla Vance. Priscilla Vance, Deshaun said, turning his laptop toward me at his kitchen table, is the aunt of a woman named Renata Cole, and Renata Cole is the actual controlling signatory on all 3 accounts. I asked who in God's name Renata Cole was. Deshaun had already pulled her business history going back 9 years. 2016, financial consultant for a regional trucking outfit in York County that folded 18 months later, owing creditors nearly $200,000. 2019, same pattern, different company, this time in Cumberland County. Renata Cole had a history, and my son was not her first. I asked Deshaun the only question that mattered. Was Marcus smart enough to build something like this on his own? Deshaun was kind about it, but he was honest. He said the structure was too clean, too practiced, the kind of architecture that comes from someone who's run this exact play before, not someone building it from scratch. Marcus had signed the transfer authorizations. Marcus had the access, but somebody had found him, specifically because he had exactly what she needed: company access, a father with a health scare on record, and enough quiet resentment about never quite measuring up to look the other way while she moved money through him like a pipe. I thought about a dinner 8 months back where Marcus mentioned meeting a financial consultant who could help streamline the business's cash flow. I'd told him to be careful, and he'd gotten quiet and defensive in a way I read as wounded pride at the time, and now understood as something closer to guilt. There was still the matter of my own health, and here is where I have to tell you, the part that made my hands shake, typing out my own thoughts weeks later. Marcus had started bringing me coffee every morning for the past 4 months, said he wanted to spend more time with his old man, wanted to make amends for how distant he'd been. He'd stand in my kitchen at 6:30 every morning and pour it himself from a thermos he brought from his own apartment, and I'd been touched by it, genuinely touched, the first real tenderness from my son in years. I did not drink the coffee the next morning. I sealed it in a sandwich bag instead and drove it 40 minutes to a private lab a nurse friend of Ruth's had recommended years back for something unrelated. Then I called Dr. Errand, a man I'd known since our sons played Little League together, and asked him to run every test he could think of on me that hadn't already been run, quietly, and to open his private practice on a Saturday to do it. He called me 2 days later, and his voice had the particular careful flatness doctors use when they're about to say something they wish they didn't have to. My blood work showed elevated levels of a substance he needed to say slowly and spell out, one that in small, accumulated doses over months produces symptoms that look exactly like ordinary decline in a man my age. The tremor, the dizziness, the fog, especially in men my age, he said. It's the kind of thing families miss because they're not looking for it. Because why would they look for it in their own son's coffee thermos? The lab results on the coffee came back 48 hours later. Confirmed. I sat in my truck in the lab parking lot for a long time after that call. I thought about Corinne on an overturned bucket telling me she couldn't go home. I thought about the folder in Marcus's old desk drawer, the 14 transfers, the mailbox in Lancaster pretending to be an office. I thought about Renata Cole finding my son the way a fisherman finds a weak spot in a net. And I thought about how much of this had happened right under my roof while I stayed too busy running 4 store locations to notice my own son had become someone I didn't recognize. I did not go to the police that morning. I want you to understand that too, because a detective I later came to trust told me most people in my position do exactly what I did, which is try to look their own child in the eye one more time before they let the law take over the looking. I invited Marcus to Sunday dinner. I told him I wanted to talk about handing him more responsibility at the business, maybe even naming him president of operations, the kind of bait I knew would bring him running with a smile on his face and probably a fresh thermos of coffee in his hand. He showed up early, in fact, hovering in my kitchen at 6 that Sunday morning under the pretense of helping me get things ready, and poured 2 cups from his thermos like he'd done every morning for 4 months. I did not drink mine. I set it on the counter and told him, plainly, that I knew about Redline Capital Solutions. I knew about Renata Cole. I knew about the coffee. I want to tell you his face didn't change, that he stayed cold and unbothered, because that would make him easier to hate. But it isn't true. His face crumpled the way it used to when he was 7 years old and got caught in a lie he desperately wished he hadn't told. And for one terrible second, I saw my little boy standing in my kitchen, instead of the man who'd been slowly poisoning me for 4 months. And both of those people were real, and both of them were my son. And I don't know how to make peace with that even now. It was never supposed to go this far, he said. She said if something happened to you naturally, gradually, nobody would ever look twice at an old man's health declining. She said we just needed 6 more months before the trust restructuring went through. Detective Marla Sanchez was waiting in my dining room, along with 2 officers, because I had called her the night before after Dr. Feld's results came back, and she had asked me to let this Sunday breakfast play out exactly as I'd planned it, wired and recorded, so there would be no question later about what my son had said with his own mouth. Marcus didn't run. He stood there in my kitchen with his hand still on the thermos and asked me, in a voice that cracked in half, if any of the last 4 months had been real, if he'd meant any of the coffee, any of the mornings. I told him the coffee had never been real, but that I had. They took him out through my front door at 7:40 that morning. Detective Sanchez told me Renata Cole had been picked up 2 hours earlier at Harrisburg International. One-way ticket to Tampa in her own name, 2 suitcases, and a laptop already flagged for review. She'd been confident enough in her timeline that she hadn't bothered hiding. I brought Corinne home 3 weeks later, once the restraining order was finalized and Marcus's arraignment was behind us. She had the baby in February, a boy, and she named him Walter after me, which I did not expect, and which undid me more than the arrest ever had. I held my grandson in the same rocking chair Ruth used to sit in on the back porch, and I told him, out loud, to nobody, and to her, specifically, that I finally understood what she'd been trying to tell me all those years about paying attention to the people right in front of you instead of the ones you assume will always be there. Looking back on all of it now, here's the one thing I keep returning to, the thing it took me 69 years and a poisoned cup of coffee to finally understand. You can spend a lifetime building something with your hands and still leave your own children standing in an empty room, waiting for you to notice them. I built 4 stores and a warehouse and a life Ruth and I were proud of, and I still nearly lost everything that actually mattered because I mistook being present for actually paying attention. A son who grows up watching his father count inventory instead of counting moments learns, eventually, to go looking for value in exactly the wrong places. I am not proud of the father I was for most of Marcus's life. I am grateful, more than I know how to say, that the truth found its way to me before it was too late to do anything but grieve it. If this story reached something honest in you tonight, tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. Share it with someone in your life who needs to hear it. And if you'd like to walk through more of these journeys with me, stay close, because there's more of my life I still need to tell you about. Thank you for sitting with an old man's story tonight. It means more than you know, Claude responded. The people right in front of you are never guaranteed to stay there forever, so notice them today, not someday. The people right in front of you are never guaranteed to stay there forever, so notice them today, not someday. A morning coffee, a quiet dinner, a phone call you keep putting off, those small moments are the whole relationship, not the warm-up to it. Love isn't proven by what you build or provide. It's proven by whether the people you love actually feel you paying attention to them, right now, while you still can. A small note for you. This story was imagined and written with the help of AI, meant purely to bring you a bit of entertainment while carrying a genuine, positive lesson along with it.